Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
You know, usually when you sit down to play a game of chess, there's this fundamental understanding between both players.
Right. The rules are the rules.
Exactly. The knight moves in that L shape, the bishop stays on its color, and the board has exactly 64 squares. It's a level playing field.
Yeah.
But imagine sitting down for a really high-stakes match and you suddenly realize the house isn't just making the rules. They can secretly change them mid-game.
Oh, that sounds like a nightmare.
Right. You go to move your rook, and suddenly they tell you rooks can't move backward anymore, or you try to call checkmate, and they just, they add an extra row of squares to the board to escape. It just creates an almost impossible maze.
Yeah, it becomes a game where the opponent's main strategy isn't just to outplay you. I mean, they want to completely dismantle the reality of the game itself right while you're trying to play it.
And that impossible maze is... well, it's exactly what we are exploring in today's deep dive. We're looking at the anatomy of institutional retaliation.
It's a fascinating and frankly very dark landscape to navigate.
It really is. We want to map out the specific step-by-step tactics that an intelligence agency allegedly uses to dismantle and silence its own whistleblowers.
Yeah, and our entire focus today comes from a single source.
Right. A YouTube video titled Destroying Whistleblowers, How They Do It, which features the personal testimony of a man named Kevin Shipp.
Now, right at the top, we need to make something crystal clear to you, the listener. We are not taking sides today.
Absolutely not. We are not here to endorse or verify or validate the claims made in this video. Our mission is just to impartially map out the ideas and the allegations exactly as Shipp presents them.
Exactly. We're just looking at his blueprint of how this system allegedly operates.
So let's start with the source himself. I mean, who is Kevin Shipp and how does he end up in this crazy situation?
Well, according to his own account, Shipp wasn't like a low-level employee or an underperformer with an axe to grind.
Right.
He claims he was a highly decorated Category 1 officer with a totally spotless personnel and security record.
Hold on. What does Category 1 actually mean in this context?
So in the intelligence community, a Category 1 designation essentially means you're operating at the absolute highest tiers of clearance and operational capability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you're not a desk analyst. You are often dealing with frontline, highly sensitive operations. It signifies a person who has been, thoroughly vetted, tested, and trusted with the agency's most critical assets.
So basically a model employee by their own internal metrics.
Precisely. And the stakes he describes are incredibly high. He alleges that while living on a secret base, he uncovered extreme criminal activity and toxic hazards.
Toxic hazards? Like what?
Specifically, he claims mycotoxins and even nerve agents were leaking into the house his family was officially ordered to live in.
Gosh, the health impacts he describes in the video were just horrific. He talks about his wife suffering instant dementia, severe bleeding, and bruising.
Yeah, and his oldest son sustained severe immune damage and clinical PTSD. It was really bad.
Faced with all that, Shipp starts documenting everything, right?
He does. He gathers multiple medical diagnoses, evidence of break-ins, and proof of a cover-up. And he decides to report it through the proper channels.
Which brings us to the very beginning of the silencing process. Because, the moment you report an issue, the system immediately attempts to control the narrative.
Which makes sense from an institutional standpoint. If you control the boundaries of the complaint, you control the outcome.
So how do they establish those boundaries right out of the gate?
Well, Shipp claims the first roadblock is legal representation. He alleges that the CIA forces whistleblowers to use a lawyer from a CIA-approved list.
He literally calls it having the fox in charge of the henhouse. But wait, is that even legal?
It's definitely a gray area.
Right, because if you're blowing the whistle on an agency, how can they dictate who your lawyer is?
Well, they justify it through the lens of national security. The argument is that because you are dealing with classified information, your attorney must have the proper security clearances to review your evidence.
So the agency helpfully provides a pre-vetted list of lawyers.
Exactly. But the practical effect, as Shipp points out, is containment. I mean, if the institution you are blowing the whistle on gets to mandate who holds your shield, they implicitly control your defense.
Because those approved attorneys rely on the agency for their clearance and their livelihood. They aren't going to rock the boat too hard.
Well, that is the implication, yeah. To get around this, Shipp says he secretly hired an outside attorney.
Oh, wow. How did he pull that off?
He somehow managed to get that attorney CIA cleared without the agency knowing his ultimate strategy beforehand.
It's pretty clever.
Yeah, and by doing that, Shipp claims he took away their ability to contain his evidence. He filed a personal injury suit, and according to him, that sent the agency into an absolute panic.
Okay, so he bypasses the lawyer trap. He has his outside counsel. He goes through the proper administrative channels, and he files a 15-page official internal grievance.
Right, perfectly conforming to CIA regulations.
Including all his hard evidence. And this leads to what might be, honestly, the most mind-boggling claim in the whole video.
It is wild.
Shipp alleges that his grievance was completely blocked and deleted from the CIA's permanent cable traffic database, which, by the way, he points out is a felony.
Yeah. He says that when he and his attorney went to confront the Office of General Counsel about this missing grievance, the officials left the room, came back, and produced a single-page document.
Wait, a single page?
Yes. It was written in blue ink in someone else's handwriting, and they tried to claim that this handwritten note was his official grievance.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I really have to push back here.
Yeah.
We're talking about a highly secure intelligence agency.
Sure.
A permanent cable traffic database isn't just like a Word document on someone's desktop. It is a secure, networked, centralized system meant to permanently archive communications.
Right.
Wouldn't deleting a record from that leave a massive digital footprint? I mean, it feels like trying to hide an elephant under a rug. It just seems impossibly brazen.
It does seem brazen. In fact, it seems completely reckless. But, if we analyze the mechanics of institutional power, this is a textbook example of institutional gaslighting.
How so? I mean, they must know he knows it's fake.
Exactly. The goal here isn't necessarily to execute a flawless, invisible cybercrime where no one ever knows what happened.
Then what is the goal?
The goal is a show of force. Think about the psychological impact of that moment.
Okay.
You're standing in an office demanding they acknowledge your 15-page, heavily documented grievance. The institution looks you dead in the eye, hands you a handwritten blue ink note, and says, "This is all we have."
Oh, wow. So they are essentially demonstrating their power to alter reality.
Exactly. It's not just about hiding the evidence. It's about showing you that your evidence doesn't even matter because they control what officially exists.
That is chilling. They're showing you that the standard rules do not apply to them.
Right. They are attempting to destabilize you, to make you question your own standing, and to legally isolate you by destroying the very paperwork you need to proceed to the next administrative step.
But according to Shipp's timeline, this brazen move actually backfires.
Yeah.
Because his outside attorney had already presented the real, documented evidence to a federal district judge.
Yes. And the judge looked at it and allegedly noted that Shipp had the agency, quote, over a barrel.
So the judge refused to shut the case down.
Right, which puts the bureaucracy in a really difficult position. Their standard mechanism for absorbing and deleting a complaint completely failed.
And because Shipp's performance reviews and security files were completely spotless, they couldn't just fire him for incompetence or revoke his clearance for cause.
Right. So what does a massive machine do when it can't delete you and it can't fire you?
It pivots.
Yeah.
It has to manufacture a crisis that operates outside of your professional performance. This brings us to what I like to call the bureaucratic setup out of a spy thriller. It's like they create an emergency, hand you a fire extinguisher to put it out, and then arrest you for unauthorized use of safety equipment.
That's a perfect analogy. Let's walk through how Shipp says this trap was built.
Please.
So the foundation of the trap begins with the toxic house itself. The chief of base officially orders Shipp and his family to evacuate the property.
Makes sense.
Crucially, the chief orders Shipp to use his government-issued American Express card for all the evacuation and relocation expenses.
But Shipp is a veteran intelligence officer. He knows better, right?
Right. He and his wife demand this order in writing, and the chief of base allegedly refuses.
Not just once, though.
No, twice. He refuses to put it in an email or a memo, but continues to verbally order the use of the government card.
Anytime a superior in a federal bureaucracy absolutely refuses to document an order involving government funds, alarm should be ringing.
Oh, absolutely. But we have to remember the context here. Shipp is operating in a state of absolute, profound crisis.
Because of his family's health.
Yes. To prove the house was toxic, since the CIA allegedly refused to test it themselves, Shipp hired an outside environmental testing company called ServPro.
Right, the private company.
The ServPro investigator goes into the house, and the environment is so contaminated that her tongue actually swells up.
That detail is just wild.
She experiences acute chemical exposure and has to immediately leave. ServPro then determines that absolutely everything the family owns inside that house, clothes, toys, furniture, baby pictures, has been contaminated.
And it all must be taken out and destroyed. The family is essentially left with the clothes on their backs.
Right. But amidst all this trauma, Shipp has ServPro take his wife's priceless, irreplaceable family heirloom furniture to a warehouse to try and decontaminate it.
That's just awful.
And shortly after, Shipp gets a phone call from the manager of the ServPro in San Antonio. The manager demands $15,000 within 24 hours.
Or else what?
Or he is going to throw this priceless heirloom furniture out onto the curb to be destroyed.
That is an incredibly aggressive, sudden escalation by an outside vendor. It sounds like outright extortion.
It does.
Why would a vendor suddenly turn the screws like that on a family in crisis?
Well, Shipp provides a very disturbing piece of context for that. A week prior to this ransom demand, that original ServPro investigator, the one whose tongue swelled up, calls Shipp to apologize.
Apologize for what?
She tells him she is leaving ServPro and stepping away from his case because she received, quote, an offer I can't refuse.
Let me guess what the offer came from.
She had been hired away by the CIA's own environmental contractor.
Oh my goodness. So they essentially poached the star witness to the toxicity.
Analytically, this is a masterclass in exploiting collateral damage. By allegedly absorbing the investigator who physically reacted to the toxins, the agency neutralizes a key witness.
And by leveraging the vendor holding the family's last remaining prized possessions, they apply just unbearable emotional pressure.
Exactly. They aren't attacking Shipp's spotless employment record anymore. They are attacking his vulnerable family to force a mistake.
And the trap is sprung. Desperate to save his wife's family history, while she is suffering from instant dementia and his son is suicidal, Shipp puts the $15,000 on his government American Express card,
which he intends to pay off with his salary later. He is just following that verbal order he was given.
And the moment that charge clears, a supervisor leaks to him that he is officially being placed under investigation for misusing a government credit card.
There's the fire extinguisher trap.
Unbelievable. They allegedly engineered a scenario where doing the right thing for his family and technically following a superior's verbal directive became a supposedly objective administrative violation.
They successfully turned a deeply personal tragedy into a sterile, fireable HR infraction.
Shipp says in the video that he was in the fog of the horror of trying to save his family, which is why he didn't see the trap coming until it was too late. But once he realizes he's under investigation, he tries to counter-move. I mean, how do you even fight an administrative charge like that?
You try to remove the ammunition. Shipp figures if he pays the card off immediately, there is no financial loss to the government, and the misuse charge loses its teeth.
Makes logical sense.
So he goes to the CIA's internal credit union, where he has spotless credit, and takes out a $15,000 personal loan to pay off the Amex.
Checkmate, right. He thwarted the charge.
That's what he thought. But when you try to outmaneuver the system, the retaliation just stales. It goes from grand conspiracies down to incredibly granular, vindictive administrative actions.
Oh, they do.
Shipp claims he actually has the credit union manager on tape admitting that the CIA executive officer ordered them to take action against Shipp.
What kind of action?
They raised the interest rates on all of Shipp's existing loans. They went into the system and deleted his already approved hardship loans, and they even went so far as to block his access to his thrift retirement plans.
Wait, I need a pause here. How does a government agency just call up a credit union and tell them to hike someone's interest rate?
It's crazy, right?
And the thrift savings plan, that's the federal government's 401k equivalent, that is managed by an entirely separate federal retirement board. How does a base commander interfere with that?
Well, it speaks to the deeply incestuous relationship between agency leadership and the financial institutions that serve them.
Okay, explain that.
While a credit union is technically a separate entity, their board of directors and their primary customer base are entirely composed of agency personnel.
Ah.
If a high-ranking executive officer tells a credit union manager that an employee is a security risk or under federal investigation, the financial institution often complies with requests to freeze assets or alter terms, citing internal risk management.
And what about the retirement funds?
As for the thrift savings plan, blocking access usually involves interfering with the agency's own payroll and HR administrators who authorize the disbursements rather than hacking the retirement board itself.
Wow. So they essentially put a freeze on his financial existence from the inside out. We start this story talking about alleged felonies and destroyed evidence, and now we are down to messing with the guy's car loan interest rates.
It's all connected.
What is the end game of making it impossible for him to access his own money?
It is the strategy of absolute resource depletion. If an institution cannot defeat your evidence in a fair fight, their most effective alternative is to drain your ability to wage the war.
Your financial resources, your emotional bandwidth.
Your social standing, yeah. You cannot fund a legal battle against the federal government if you can't even pay your artificially inflated mortgage rate.
And they don't stop at the wallet, they go for the mind. Shipp talks about being ordered into the office of the polygraph division chief, and this chief just starts screaming and yelling demeaning things at him.
Which is a very calculated provocation.
Yeah, Shipp says he recognized it immediately. The goal was to provoke him into losing his temper and yelling back.
Because if he did, they could instantly fire him for insubordination.
Exactly. It wouldn't be about the toxic house anymore. It would be about him being unhinged in the workplace. But Shipp recognized the trap and stayed totally calm and respectful.
And when provocation fails, the next logical step in this blueprint is isolation.
Right.
Since they couldn't legally fire him or revoke his security clearance because he hadn't actually committed a fireable offense, they essentially put him in a box.
They revoked his badge, placed him on administrative leave, and walked him out of the building right in front of his trainees.
Isolation is profoundly damaging, both practically and psychologically. By publicly parading him out, they send a chilling, unspoken message to every other employee in the building.
Basically saying, this is what happens if you step out of line.
Exactly. Do not help this man. It cuts the whistleblower off from their support network, their colleagues, and their sense of professional identity.
It's so isolating.
Furthermore, Shipp claims they used that administrative leave status to legally monitor all of his communications, eavesdrop on his calls, and harass him.
It's just wave after wave of pressure, a perfectly designed labyrinth. But here is where the story takes a turn I really did not see coming.
Oh.
Despite the attorney traps, the erased records, the manufactured credit card crisis, and the financial freeze, Shipp's outside attorney is still fighting in federal court. And they actually win.
Yeah, a federal judge reviews the remaining evidence and orders the CIA to a mediated settlement, which, honestly, in the realm of intelligence community whistleblowers, is incredibly rare.
It's unheard of.
Yeah.
The CIA is allegedly forced to admit guilt. They sit down and sign a legal settlement agreement that includes financial compensation for the family's destroyed property and health issues.
And an official letter of apology to Shipp.
It sounds like the end of a movie where the system finally works and the good guy gets justice.
But a bureaucracy of that size rarely accepts defeat. When the standard rules result in a loss, they invoke the ultimate trump card.
A week after signing this settlement, a Department of Justice attorney representing the CIA calls Shipp's lawyer. The DOJ attorney threatens that if Shipp does not accept a mere fraction of the agreed-upon settlement money, the CIA will invoke something called the state secrets privilege.
Now, to understand the gravity of this, we need to look at what the state secrets privilege actually is.
Break it down for us.
It is an evidentiary rule originally created to protect highly sensitive national security information from being exposed during civil litigation.
Like what?
For example, if a contractor sues the government over a breached contract regarding a stealth bomber, the government can invoke this privilege to say, we can't defend ourselves in open court because discussing the schematics of this bomber would endanger the country to foreign adversaries.
Right. But how does that apply to a toxic house in Virginia?
That is exactly the point Shipp is making. Shipp refuses to be blackmailed. He tells them to abide by the legal agreement they just signed. So 1 week later, they drop the hammer.
The CIA invokes the state secrets privilege. And by doing so, they seal every single piece of Shipp's evidence. The medical records, the ServPro reports, the grievance. And they threaten Shipp, his wife, his children, and his attorney with federal prison if they ever speak about the case to anyone ever again.
Even amongst themselves in their own home.
Think about the implications of how that mechanism is being applied here.
It's staggering. A legal shield explicitly designed to protect national security from foreign spies is, according to Shipp, being weaponized as an ultimate domestic gag order.
Wow.
It is allegedly being used to conceal institutional criminality and silence a family who are the victims of that criminality.
It's flipping the game board right when you're about to be checkmated. They lost the legal game, so they just classified the game itself as a state secret.
It perfectly illustrates Shipp's overarching thesis about a perfected system. When the bureaucratic roadblocks fail, when the financial and psychological warfare fails, the institution can simply wrap itself in the impenetrable flag of national security.
And just declare its actions beyond the reach of the law. Which leaves Shipp with an impossible choice. Be silent, take the fraction of the money, and let the system win, or risk federal prison, and potentially his life, to expose it.
And Shipp chose to go fully public.
He really did. He took all the evidence they tried to seal and published it on the internet and in his book, Twilight of the Shadow Government. He decided that the only way to beat the system was to drag it out into the light.
And that brings us to the core reason he made this video and continues to speak out. He isn't just recounting his trauma for the sake of venting.
No.
He is trying to create a roadmap for future whistleblowers. He wants to warn them about the traps before they step into them.
So, as a listener, you might be thinking, okay, this is a wild story, but I don't work for an intelligence agency. Why should I care about one former officer's ordeal with a toxic house?
Shipp argues that you should care because the apparatus he describes is rapidly expanding its reach. The system that he claims was used to perfectly dismantle his life is now looking outward at the domestic population.
He explicitly calls out the CIA's alleged use of programs like Palantir to collect ordinary Americans' personal data.
For those unfamiliar, Palantir is a massive data analytics software company. It was initially funded in part by In-Q-Tel, which is the CIA's venture capital arm.
Right.
Palantir software is incredibly powerful at stitching together seemingly disconnected databases. It can take your emails, your financial records, your toll booth passes, and your medical information and create a comprehensive, predictive web of your life.
And Shipp's point is that the exact same lack of internal accountability that allowed an agency to terrorize his family is now managing this vast collection of our civil data.
Exactly. He ends his video by quoting Thomas Jefferson. When people fear their government, there is tyranny. When government fears the people, there is liberty.
He is drawing a direct, unbroken line between the abuse of whistleblowers and the broader threat to civil liberties.
If the internal alarms are systematically disabled, the external actions go completely unchecked.
If you want to dive deeper into this blueprint and hear this entire story in his own words, I highly recommend you check the description of this deep dive.
Yeah, the link is right down there.
We've put the link there so you can watch the full interview and hear these allegations directly from Kevin Shipp. It really is something you need to hear for yourself.
It is a narrative that forces us to critically examine the balance of power between massive institutions and the individuals who try to hold them accountable.
It really leaves you with a lingering, unsettling thought. If an intelligence agency possesses a perfected system capable of utterly dismantling its own highly trained insiders, people who know exactly how the bureaucratic game is played, what chance does an ordinary citizen have if they stumble onto something they shouldn't?
That is the exact question he wants us asking.
And it's one you'll be thinking about long after you stop playing the game. Until next time, thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.